They hate realizing that you saw every move before it was fully played, that nothing about their strategy surprised you the way they thought it did. What unsettles them most is not that you exposed them, but that you chose not to. They are furious because they believe their performance was flawless, their deception airtight, their timing perfect. Knowing you watched it all unfold without interrupting shatters the illusion of their superiority. They thought they were clever for so long because you let them feel clever. They never questioned why you never rushed to correct them or stop them mid-scheme. They hate that you knew what they were doing and still smiled at the right moments, still nodded at the right times, still allowed the narrative to move forward without resistance. They are disturbed by the reality that your silence was not confusion but consent to let the truth reveal itself fully without your interference. They thought they were manipulating your reality. What breaks them now is knowing you were simply allowing their truth to ripen into something undeniable. They replay every moment now, scanning for the exact point where you realized everything. What they can't stomach is knowing you probably knew far earlier than they ever suspected. They hate that you didn't confront them when they were still rehearsed, still confident, still protected by their masks. You waited until their performance exhausted itself. They believed you were behind the curve. They never realized you had already reached the conclusion while they were still building the illusion. They hate that their control only existed because you allowed the stage to stay lit long enough for them to expose themselves completely. They assumed your calm meant safety for them. They didn't understand that your calm was the most dangerous thing in the room. They are angry because your participation now feels like a mirror they can't look away from. Everything they did with confidence now feels grotesque in hindsight. They hate knowing that every lie they told landed in a mind that was already aware of the truth. That awareness turns every memory into quiet humiliation. They thought your obedience meant you needed them. They didn't realize your patience meant you were timing your freedom. They hate that you never begged for honesty. You didn't need it. You already had clarity. They believed your staying meant agreement. They never considered that staying can sometimes be surveillance rather than loyalty. They are enraged that their secrets never weighed on you the way they thought they would. You carried knowledge without letting it rot you. They assumed your lack of reaction meant lack of awareness. What terrifies them now is knowing it meant restraint. They hate that you mastered the art of appearing unaffected while collecting every inconsistency like evidence that no court would ever need. They believed they were rehearsing you through emotional choreography. They didn't realize you were studying the rhythm to step out of it flawlessly. They feel small knowing you watched their ego perform on a stage you no longer believed in. They hate that you gave them room to reveal the ugliest versions of themselves without ever lowering yourself into the same mud. They can't accept that you understood their motives so clearly and still allowed the story to complete itself without rewriting it. They are unsettled by how clean your exit was, how untouched you seemed by the mess they were still standing in. They hate that they never saw fear in you. Even while they thought they were winning, you never reflected the desperation they were hoping to create. They believed your endurance meant emotional dependence. They now realize it meant emotional immunity. They are disturbed by how little they truly mattered once you understood the full scope of their behavior. They hate that you didn't collapse when the truth became undeniable. You simply transitioned. They are furious because your calm in retrospect feels like quiet dominance they never consented to play against. They believe the game belonged to them. They didn't realize you had already decided it wasn't worth winning. They hate knowing they exposed themselves completely to someone who never planned to use the exposure as a weapon. They are angry because your knowing participation makes them feel transparent in a way no confrontation ever could. They thought they were shaping the narrative. They never realized you were letting it finish so you could close the book without doubt. They despise that you understood the entire game and still played along long enough to see exactly who they were when no one was forcing them to choose. They hate that your silence now feels heavier than any accusation you could ever make. They can't escape the truth that you weren't fooled, you were finished long before they knew the end was coming. And this is the truth that seals their anger into something permanent and inescapable. You didn't stay because you were unaware. You didn't stay because you were weak. You didn't stay because you were dependent. You stayed long enough to be certain. They didn't outplay you. They didn't outsmart you. They didn't outlast you. They simply revealed themselves completely to someone who no longer needed proof. They hate that you knew their entire game and still let it run to the final scene, without interference, without chaos, without revenge, because now there is no ambiguity left, only clarity, and clarity is the one ending they cannot rewrite. They hate that every smile you gave them now feels like a quiet confession you never needed to speak. What once felt like normal moments now echo with meaning they can't escape. They are disturbed that your presence was never as innocent as they assumed, that behind your calm eyes was awareness patiently waiting for its own timing. They feel exposed by the idea that you were never emotionally behind them, only strategically ahead of the moment when you would no longer need to stay. They hate that your participation now feels like permission they never should have been given, because it allowed them to become their truest, ugliest selves without resistance. They replay every lie now, knowing it landed in a mind that was already aware, and that realization turns confidence into embarrassment. They feel humiliated by the possibility that you never once acted out of confusion, only out of choice. They hate that you didn't interrupt their downfall early, because stopping it early would have saved their pride from full exposure. They are furious that you let their behavior reach its most honest form before you removed yourself. They wish you had confronted them sooner so they could have reshaped themselves in time to preserve the image they were trying to protect. They despise that you saw them clearly while they never saw you coming. They are haunted by the idea that you watched them betray you without flinching, already preparing the version of yourself that would never return. They hate that every memory they cherish now feels tainted by the truth they only discovered too late. They are unsettled because your knowing silence feels more deliberate than any manipulation they ever attempted. They feel mocked by their own past confidence, now realizing it existed only because you allowed it to. They hate that you never rushed their exposure, because it means they had no one to blame but themselves. They are disturbed by how calmly you exited once you had collected all the certainty you needed. They hate that you didn't use their truth as a weapon, because that would have made them feel powerful in a familiar way. They are enraged that your restraint makes their behavior look smaller than if you had reacted explosively. They resent that you never became the villain in their story, no matter how badly they needed you to. They hate that you understood the entire game and still let it finish naturally, because now there is no confusion left, only accountability. And this is where the truth finally hardens into something unchangeable, something they can neither apologize past nor rewrite into comfort. You didn't stay to be fooled. You stayed to be sure. You didn't play along because you were lost. You played along because you were watching. You didn't leave out of anger. You left out of knowing. They hate that you understood everything and still let them become exactly who they were, without trying to save them from themselves. Because now there is no argument left, no alternate version, no misunderstanding to hide behind. Only this: they weren't exposed by you. They were exposed by time, by repetition, by their own unchecked behavior, in the presence of someone who already saw the truth and chose silence, until silence became freedom. That is the part they will never forgive you for. Not that you knew, but that you knew and still walked away clean. They wake up already irritated because your happiness reaches them before any message ever does. It leaks through other people's conversations, through passing mentions, through the simple fact that your life kept moving forward without a pause for their absence. They expected your joy to look forced at first, like a disguise you would eventually drop. What unsettles them is how natural it became, how effortless your smile looks now that it no longer carries their weight. They thought your happiness would fade once the thrill of freedom wore off. Instead, it grew steadier, calmer, more rooted, and that steady kind of joy is the hardest kind to discredit. They scroll past signs of your peace and feel something inside them tighten, not because they miss you, but because your happiness proves the story they told themselves was false. They wanted your life to dim without them so they could feel indispensable. What ruins their mood is seeing your life glow in colors they were never able to bring out in you. They thought you would struggle publicly, break quietly, or at least show signs of emotional scarcity. What they see instead is abundance, and abundance without them feels like rejection on a daily basis. They feel mocked by how easily laughter returned to your face. Every genuine moment of your joy feels like a verdict they can't appeal. They thought your happiness would look like distraction. What unsettles them is realizing it looks like alignment. They expected your freedom to be reckless. Instead, it looks intentional, and intention scares people who survive on chaos. They feel their mood spoil every time your name comes up, not with pity, but with admiration. The narrative they hoped would protect them never formed. They wanted your absence to look like loss. It looks like relief. They assumed your peace would be temporary because peace was never allowed to last when they were around. Seeing it endure without them reopens questions they worked hard to avoid. They feel irritated that your joy doesn't look loud or desperate. It looks grounded, and grounded happiness doesn't beg for witnesses. They expected your smile to carry bitterness underneath it. What unsettles them is how light it looks when it no longer has to balance disappointment. They hope time would turn your confidence into regret. What ruins their mood is seeing it mature into certainty instead. They feel uncomfortable because your happiness doesn't attack them directly, it simply exists. And existence without them is the loudest message of all. They wanted your healing to be dramatic so they could minimize it. What frustrates them is how quietly complete it looks. They feel their own emotional weather darken every time they realize you stop checking behind yourself to see who was missing. They thought your joy would need explanation. It doesn't. It simply appears consistent, unbothered, and self-contained. They feel offended by how little your happiness references them as a turning point. It references you instead. They hoped your laughter would sound like nostalgia. It sounds like presence. They thought you would fake strength to convince others you were okay. What unsettles them is realizing you don't need to convince anyone anymore. They feel displaced by your ease. Their memory of you is full of effort, compromise, and restraint. What they see now is softness without self-sacrifice. They expected your happiness to look like a performance staged for their reaction. What irritates them is how little it reacts to them at all. They feel their control evaporate every time they realize your mood no longer shifts based on their attention or silence. They wanted your joy to feel insulting so they could frame you as cruel. What terrifies them is how kind your happiness still is. They feel unsettled because your success doesn't feel vindictive. It feels organic, and organic achievements can't be discredited as revenge. They hoped your independence would collapse under loneliness. What ruins their mood is seeing how companionship with yourself seems to have multiplied your energy instead. They feel forgotten not because you erased them aggressively, but because you outgrew them naturally, and natural outgrowing offers no courtroom for protest. They expected your happiness to prove you were pretending. It proves you were waiting. They feel mocked because your life doesn't look like a comeback story driven by pain. It looks like a continuation powered by freedom. They hoped your joy would pressure you into proving something. What disturbs them is how unprovable it is. They feel small in the shadow of your light because your light doesn't seek to cast shadows at all. They wanted your happiness to look temporary so they could wait it out. What breaks their patience is how permanent it feels. They feel rejected every day, not because you block them, but because you don't need to. And this is the truth that lands on them over and over again with quiet, relentless impact. You didn't weaponize your happiness. You didn't advertise your healing. You didn't perform your peace. You simply lived well, and living well without them became the one thing they could never emotionally prepare for. Your joy is not revenge. It is not messaging. It is not commentary. It is evidence. Evidence that their chapter in your life was never the climax, only the transition. And every day you wake up happy without them, it quietly reminds them of one unbearable fact. You didn't lose them. You outgrew them. They wake up with irritation they can't name, a heaviness that doesn't belong to the day itself, but to the knowledge that somewhere, without effort or announcement, you are living well without them. They feel unsettled because your happiness doesn't look like an act of rebellion anymore. It looks like a settled state, and settled happiness can't be dismissed as temporary. They hoped your joy would burn out like a spark. What unsettles them is realizing it has become a steady flame that no longer flickers at their absence. They feel mocked not by anything you post or say, but by the simple consistency of your peace. Consistency is harder to argue with than spectacle. They expected your happiness to need witnesses for validation. What irritates them is how complete it looks even when no one is watching. They feel their mood drop because your laughter no longer carries the tension they once fed on. It rises freely now, without apology. They hoped your peace would look shallow so they could tell themselves it wasn't real. What shakes them is how deep it seems to run. They feel displaced because your joy doesn't wobble when your past crosses your path. It stands steady, unmoved by what once shook you. They believed your happiness would come with bitterness attached. What unsettles them is how clean it feels. They feel offended by how little your joy seems to need closure. It thrives without revisiting old wounds. They hoped your happiness would make them feel important in contrast. What spoils their mood is realizing your happiness doesn't reference them at all. They feel uneasy because your smile no longer looks like resilience, it looks like ease. They expected your growth to carry traces of revenge. It carries only direction. They feel exposed because your life proves that what you once endured was not your limit, it was your exit point. They hoped your joy would soften into longing. What unnerves them is how it continues without looking back. They feel forgotten each time they realize you no longer measure your days by what once hurt you. You measure them by what now fulfills you. They expected your happiness to make noise. Instead, it makes space. They feel irritated because nothing about your peace asks for their reaction anymore. Their presence or absence makes no difference to its rhythm. They thought seeing you happy would eventually stop hurting. What surprises them is how the feeling only deepens into quiet regret. They feel spoiled not by anything you've done to them, but by what you've done for yourself, and that difference is what they can't correct. And here is the final truth that seals the ending with quiet certainty. You did not set out to ruin their mood. You did not plan to make them uncomfortable. You did not design your happiness as a message. You simply chose a life that didn't require your pain to sustain it. Their discomfort is not caused by your joy. It is caused by the truth your joy reveals. That you were never broken. That you were never incapable. That you were only in the wrong place too long. Now you are in the right place. With yourself, with your peace, with your becoming. And every day you live happily without them. It doesn't shout. It doesn't attack. It doesn't explain. It simply confirms you didn't escape to survive. You left to live. They really believed your kindness was endless, that forgiveness was a reflex you could never unlearn. They mistook your patience for weakness and your softness for an unlimited resource. They expected you to open your arms the way you always did, to patch things up the way you always had, to smooth the damage the way you always tried to. They didn't realize that even the gentlest heart keeps score of its breaking points. They thought history would protect them, that all the times you forgave before would guarantee another pardon now. What they failed to see was how each forgiveness cost you something you never got back. They kept speaking to you with the same casual entitlement, the same assumption of mercy. They didn't hear the quiet change in your tone, the stillness where warmth used to live. They were waiting for the version of you who always understood too much and asked for too little. They didn't realize that version of you exhausted itself into extinction. They expected sweetness because they remembered your smile. They forgot the nights that smile survived on tears. They thought your compassion would override your memory. They never considered that memory, once sharpened into clarity, becomes protection. They came to you expecting comfort after pain, forgetting they were the architect of the pain they now feared. They believed you would choose peace through forgiveness. They didn't realize you chose peace through distance this time. They mistook your silence for processing. They didn't recognize it as closure. They were certain your heart would soften with time. What unsettled them was discovering time only clarified your resolve. They tried to remind you of who you used to be. They didn't understand that who you used to be is exactly why you changed. They expected you to temper your boundaries out of familiarity. They weren't ready for boundaries that no longer bend from memory. They kept explaining, hoping reasons could rehydrate what had emotionally dehydrated long ago. They didn't realize the soil no longer supported the same growth. They thought forgiveness was simply part of your nature. They didn't understand that nature evolves under pressure. They came back with apologies shaped by convenience instead of accountability. They expected that to be enough like it used to be. They didn't notice how calm you were this time. No trembling, no bargaining, no emotional negotiation. They feared your anger once. Now they fear your indifference more. They waited for your heart to argue with your decision. It never did. They thought regret would soften you. It sharpened you. They believed nostalgia would reopen the door. It only reminded you why it had to stay closed. They confused your capacity to love with a duty to endure. They assumed you would always absorb the impact to spare them discomfort. They didn't expect you to finally redirect that impact away from yourself. They wanted forgiveness because forgiveness kept them comfortable. They didn't ask what it had been costing you. They believed sweetness was your default setting. They didn't realize sweetness is something you choose, not something they are entitled to. They kept reaching for the old version of you like muscle memory. What they touched now was restraint. They expected emotional access the way people expect gravity, automatic and unavoidable. They didn't account for what happens when gravity turns into intention. They mistook your former silence for submission. This silence is chosen. They thought you lacked the heart to cut them off. They didn't understand that this is exactly what it looks like when the heart finally protects itself. They remembered how forgiving you once were and built their confidence on that memory. They didn't realize memory can become a warning instead of a promise. They expected grace on demand. They received boundaries on principle. They wanted the sweetness back because it made them feel safe. They never asked whether you felt safe while giving it. They believed you would always choose to understand them. They didn't prepare for the day you chose to understand yourself instead. And here is the truth that settled into permanence in your voice and your absence. You didn't lose your sweetness to bitterness. You didn't harden out of cruelty. You didn't stop forgiving out of pride. You simply ran out of space for the people who only learned to reach for you after they broke you. They thought you'd forgive again, but what you gave them instead was the final, irreversible answer. They never thought you'd have the strength to choose. They kept expecting your heart to flinch at the last second the way it always used to soften just enough for them to slip back into familiarity. What unsettled them was watching your resolve remain unmoved, steady in a way they had never seen before. They thought forgiveness lived permanently in your nature, not realizing it had lived in your hope. And once hope was exhausted, forgiveness no longer had a home. They tried to speak gently to wake the tenderness in you. They didn't understand that tenderness had learned discretion. They misread your calm as emotional numbness. They didn't know it was emotional mastery. They waited for the old warmth to leak back through your voice. What echoed instead was neutrality, and neutrality felt colder than anger ever did. They thought distance was temporary, because it always used to be. They didn't realize this time distance had direction. They told themselves you were just tired, just overwhelmed, just hurt. They didn't realize you were finished. They kept hoping time would revive what repetition had killed. They didn't grasp that time doesn't revive what clarity has buried. They expected memory to soften your edges. They didn't realize memory sharpened your boundaries instead. They thought your love would outlast their behavior. They underestimated how long you had been quietly outlasting yourself for their sake. They waited for guilt to work the way it always had. They didn't realize guilt only works on people who still question their worth. They tried to frame your decision as anger so they wouldn't have to face it as wisdom. They hoped your empathy would rescue them from accountability like it always had before. They didn't see that empathy had finally chosen its rightful owner, you. They told others you had changed, not realizing how close that statement was to the truth and how far they were from understanding why. They mistook your emotional economy for emotional poverty. They didn't understand that you simply stopped wasting what was once abundant. They searched your absence for hidden resentment, because resentment at least would mean you still cared in a familiar way. They wanted your coldness to be an act, something dramatic that would end with a soft reunion. They weren't ready to accept that your coldness was actually peace without attachment. They expected you to grow lonely enough to compromise your decision. They never imagined solitude would become lighter than their presence ever was. They believed your love was unconditional. They never asked themselves who kept violating the conditions that made it possible. They kept waiting for your exhaustion to turn into surrender. They didn't know exhaustion had already turned into resolve. They thought your sweetness was permanent because they never saw the price you paid to keep it alive. They told themselves you were being stubborn. They didn't realize you were being loyal to yourself for the first time. They kept hoping your heart would betray your boundaries. They didn't expect your boundaries to finally be backed by your heart. They assumed forgiveness was your identity. They didn't understand forgiveness had once been your survival strategy. They were prepared for tears when they came back. They weren't prepared for composure. They expected a conversation. They received a conclusion. They expected hesitation. They got certainty. They expected a crack in your voice. They found stillness instead. They kept testing the silence to see if it would break. They didn't realize the silence was no longer fragile. They waited for sweetness to return as proof they were still safe with you. They didn't understand that sweetness no longer lived in unsafe places. They wanted one last moment of emotional access. What they received was emotional finality. They thought you were withholding love out of spite. They didn't understand you were conserving it for places where it could survive. They believed you had hardened. They never saw how carefully you had to protect what was left soft inside you. They thought forgiveness would come because it always had. What broke that pattern was the day you realized forgiving them meant abandoning yourself again. And this is the truth that seals the ending so completely it leaves no room for revision. You didn't lose your sweetness to resentment. You didn't replace compassion with cruelty. You didn't trade warmth for bitterness. You simply learned that sweetness is sacred, and not everyone who wants it is worthy of touching it again. They thought you would forgive again, because they built their comfort on your endurance. You didn't forgive this time, because you finally built your future on your self-respect. That is the ending. Not loud, not dramatic, not vengeful, just final. They wanted anger because anger would have meant they still mattered to you in a loud way. They wanted rage because rage would have confirmed that they still had access to your nervous system. What broke their confidence was discovering that they no longer had the power to disturb your emotional balance at all. They prepared themselves for your explosion, for the words you would finally unleash, for the confrontation they could twist into justification. What they got instead was emptiness where reaction used to live. They mistook your calm for shock at first. They waited for the delayed storm they were sure would arrive. What arrived instead was consistency, and consistency confused them more than chaos ever could. They wanted to be shouted at because shouting still feels like connection to people who thrive on conflict. What unsettled them was realizing you no longer needed that kind of contact to feel alive. They expected tears, accusations, desperation, anything that made them feel significant in the aftermath. What they received was quiet exit energy, and it unsettled every story they told themselves about their importance. They are angry because your peace denies them a villain arc where they get to be misunderstood heroes. Your completion removed the final excuse they were still holding on to. They keep replaying moments where you should have reacted harder, louder, sharper. It frustrates them that the ending didn't validate their guilt the way anger would have. They wish you would rage so they could argue back. They wish you would hate them so they could defend themselves. Your indifference leaves them with no emotional opponent. They don't know how to place themselves in a narrative where they are not being punished through your reaction. Your lack of venom feels like a sentence they can't decode. They are furious that you didn't break the way they expected. They had prepared for your fragility. They were not prepared for your finality. They wanted chaos because chaos would have made the ending feel reversible. Your stillness made it irreversible. They wanted you to lash out because it would have meant the wound was still open. Your composure told them the wound had already sealed. They confuse your absence of anger with emotional numbness. What they fail to see is that numbness still revolves around sensation. You simply stopped revolving around them. They keep waiting for the moment you snap because they need proof that they still live somewhere inside your emotional ecosystem. What devastates them is realizing they don't. They are upset because anger would have made them important in a destructive way. What hurts is realizing they are no longer important in any way at all. They wanted your pain to make them central in the story's climax. Your quiet ending denied them that spotlight completely. They are unsettled because your detachment feels deliberate, not defensive. It feels chosen, not forced. They are enraged because they cannot blame your tone for their discomfort. You gave them no antagonistic energy to point at. They are frustrated because your silence doesn't give them material to twist. There are no words to screenshot, no reactions to provoke, no weakness to exploit. They want confrontation because confrontation still acknowledges relationship. Your disengagement suggests the relationship no longer qualifies for conflict at all. They are angry that your restraint feels dignified. They wanted mess to justify their own behavior. You gave them composure instead. They wanted you to suffer out loud. You did your suffering privately and finished with it. They feel cheated of emotional theater. You refused to perform. They wanted your anger to keep the door conversational. Your calm closed it without sound. They are irritated because your composure doesn't give them relief. It gives them questions they don't want to answer. They fear your lack of anger because it implies you already processed everything they are still trying to escape. They are unsettled because your completion looks effortless from the outside, and that makes their own internal noise feel even louder. They wanted validation through your reaction. Your lack of reaction invalidated their position entirely. They are offended because your silence reads like a verdict, not a pause. They keep trying to provoke you back into visibility because they don't know how to handle being emotionally dismissed. They wanted to feel forgiven or condemned. They were not prepared to feel finished. They don't understand how you skipped the revenge phase entirely. They didn't realize some people don't need to destroy to be done. They feel small in the face of your calm because calm doesn't argue back. It doesn't bargain. It doesn't beg. They are angry because your peace feels like a rejection of their entire emotional economy. They wanted you to stay emotionally charged so they could keep rewriting the ending. Your neutrality froze the ending into permanence. They are disturbed by how little you need to explain yourself now. You used to over-explain. Now you simply exit. They wanted your anger because anger would have meant the bond was still metabolizing inside you. Your calm means it's already been digested and released. They are furious because your silence doesn't let them outrun responsibility. There is no distraction in your response, only consequence. And this is the truth that is driving them the most insane of all. You are not angry because you are not hurt anymore. You are not loud because you already grieved. You are not reactive because you already decided. Your peace is not denial. It is conclusion. They wanted rage. You gave them resolution. They wanted noise. You gave them absence. They wanted a fight. You gave them finality. And that is why they are pissed. Because there is nothing left to battle. You are simply done. They keep checking your silence like it's a crack in the wall they can slip through. What unsettles them is how solid that silence feels, how unmoving it remains no matter how loud their presence becomes. They expected your emotions to linger like an unfinished argument. What they found instead was a completed sentence with no punctuation left to add. They feel insulted by how peacefully you walked away, as if their actions deserved more resistance than you offered. Your ease of leaving wounded their pride deeper than any insult ever could. They thought your anger was proof of attachment. They didn't realize that detachment is the real proof of freedom. They are disturbed because your calm feels intentional, not accidental. It feels like a decision you rehearsed in your soul long before they noticed the door closing. They wanted to haunt your thoughts the way they once did. What terrifies them is discovering they now exist only as a closed chapter you no longer revisit. They don't know how to compete with someone who is no longer competing at all. Your withdrawal removed the game they survived on. They keep mistaking your peace for apathy, not understanding that apathy still carries weight, while your peace carries release. They are angry because your life kept moving without pausing to grieve them publicly. Your quiet continuity shattered their sense of relevance. They waited for you to fold under memory. Instead, memory folded into wisdom. They wanted your anger to prove they mattered enough to damage you deeply. Your completion proved they no longer matter at all. They are unsettled because your eyes no longer search for validation, explanation, or closure. You already gave all of that to yourself. They feel erased by how little emotional space they occupy in you now. Nothing offends the ego more than being rendered unnecessary. They thought your silence was a tactic. It is not a move, it is a state. They are irritated by how quickly your nervous system learned safety in their absence. That speed makes them feel replaceable. They do not fear your voice anymore. They fear your lack of it. They keep hoping for a relapse into reaction, a moment where the old you fights back into existence. What arrives instead is the newer you, steady and uninterested. They imagined your ending as dramatic, chaotic, loud. What they received was clinical, quiet, and permanent. They can't weaponize your peace against you, and that leaves them disarmed. They do not know how to survive in a world where you do not emotionally orbit them anymore. And this is where the truth finally seals itself without noise, without apology, without return. You are not calm to prove a point. You are calm because there is no point left to prove. You are not detached to punish them. You are detached because you saved yourself. You are not silent because you are weak. You are silent because you are finished speaking to what no longer listens. They wanted to live in your anger. They wanted to survive inside your reaction. They wanted to exist through your emotional fire. You didn't burn. You didn't explode. You didn't fight. You exited. And that is why they are still angry. Because anger kept them relevant. Your completion erased them from the battlefield entirely. This is not revenge. This is not bitterness. This is not coldness. This is freedom without witnesses. And there is nothing more final than being done without needing to be understood.